Hello and welcome. My name is Teresa Miller. I'm the Vice Provost for Equity Inclusion here at UB. I'm also the university's Chief Diversity Officer and a member of the faculty of the School of Law. And I'm here to talk to you about reducing barriers to diversity in the faculty search process. My goals are really threefold. One, I'd like to describe for you SUNY and UB's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and how that commitment can be honored in the faculty search process. Secondly, I'd like to talk with you about implicit bias, unconscious bias, and the ways in which that bias can create barriers to diversity in the search process. And finally, I'd like to share with you some best practices for eliminating bias. What is so important about diversity that we need to change our faculty search processes to eliminate barriers to it? Well, there are many explanations. For one, there's the business case for diversity. Students are our clients in many respects at UB, and students want to be able to see faculty members who represent and resemble them. But there's a case besides the business case, and that's the functional diversity case, right? And that's that diverse faculties, diverse teams in research solve problems faster and better. And the more complex the problem, the more the team benefits from diversity. The SUNY Board of Trustees approved a new diversity plan on September 10th, 2015 that is very clear that SUNY aims to be the most inclusive university system in the country. The highlights of that diversity policy are the recognition that diversity is essential to excellence in the university setting. And what do I mean by diversity? Diversity is broadly defined to include race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, age, socioeconomic status, status as a veteran, and disability. The SUNY policy also requires every campus to have a chief diversity officer and mandates that campuses develop and implement strategic diversity and inclusion plans. The new policy says that the campus should be representative of the diversity of the state of New York and also of the world. The new policy also requires that even when search firms are used, they too will be scrutinized for their success in generating diverse candidates. So how do you as a faculty search committee advance UB's commitment to equity inclusion in the faculty search process? I'll give you a hint. What does your candidate see when they enter the room? Do they see diversity? Do they see a diverse group of people representing lots of different sexes, genders, and racial and ethnic backgrounds? If they do, then you're communicating already your firm commitment to equity and inclusion. You're communicating that you value diversity. Here's another hint. So now you have some diversity in the room, but what else is going on? What else is happening? You've got people smiling. They're effusive, they're interested, they're leaning into the candidate. And it's a general message that your department is welcoming and inclusive. So here's the last hint. What do you see? A hand, right, that symbolizes a barrier. And you see orange fish on one side and a green fish on the other side of the barrier. Is it absolutely critical that the candidate be orange, or that it have fins and be able to breathe underwater? This picture demonstrates the importance of evaluating candidates with clear, objective criteria and understanding the difference between the critical job qualifications, the it'd be nice to have them job qualifications, and the extras. It's best to hunt, not fish. When you fish, you throw the bait out and you see what gathers around it. And it's kind of you kind of luck out right? Depending on which fish sees the bait first, right? But there's no science to it. There's not a lot of planning or strategy going into it. When you hunt, you figure out, where does the bear live? You know, what's likely to spook the bear? How do I approach the bear? And you're more intentional, more strategic, and more methodical in your approach to identifying candidates. So let me talk to you about bias for a minute. Sometimes faculty members come to a search with very strongly held views about what constitutes excellence and what doesn't. For instance, did the person publish in the Harvard Business Journal or the Harvard Law Journal? Or do they come from kind of the traditional place that faculty members come to your department from? The problem with that mindset is that you miss a lot of qualified candidates. And if you're really clear about objective criteria, you have some consensus on what it is you're looking for, you'll find that in order to bring that functional diversity to your faculty, you don't want the same people who publish in the same journals from the same schools with the same dissertation advisors, right? You want the difference of opinions that a diverse applicant pool can bring. Something you might not be as aware of is unconscious or implicit bias. And those are the associations that we have over the years been trained to make, or associations that have been reinforced in our minds that sometimes persuade us to overlook people who would be qualified. We sometimes associate a particular race or gender with a particular quality. And it's not the association itself that's problematic, because we all go on autopilot, right? At the same time, if you're on autopilot and you don't realize it or understand it, that creates problems. So in the search process, it's really important to be able to understand when unconscious biases are coming out. Fortunately, we have tons of data on this now. In the last 20 years, many researchers have studied unconscious bias. A great example of how implicit bias operates is the musical auditions for the Philadelphia Philharmonic. The Philharmonic cut down bias that cut against women in auditions simply by using a scrim that obscured the images of the two musicians that were on the stage playing the same piece with the same instrument and being judged by judges in the audience. But when they carpeted the stage, they actually achieved 50-50 parity, men and women selected for the Philharmonic, because no longer could you hear the women's heels or the male footsteps as they approached the stage. So that was an example of musical auditions, but let's tackle something a little closer to home. In a study published in 2003, two researchers, Trix and Psinka, found some startling information about how gender bias operates in the search process for medical school faculty positions. A study of over 300 recommendation letters for medical school faculty hired at a large United States medical school found that letters for female applicants differed systematically from those for males. Letters written for women were shorter, provided minimal assurance rather than solid recommendation, raised more doubts, and portrayed women as students and teachers while portraying men as researchers and professionals. Those letters also more frequently mentioned women's personal lives. So in considering letters of recommendation for your faculty candidates, keep in mind that implicit bias may be at work even in those circumstances. Researchers have also established that implicit bias is at play in the consideration of underrepresented minority candidates. A professor at the University of Pennsylvania led an investigation that emailed more than 6,500 professors and 250 schools requests for mentoring meetings. In each case, messages pretended to be from male and female students with names that suggested that they were Caucasian or African American or from Asian or Indian backgrounds. The patterns of bias were clear. The response rate for underrepresented minority candidates, as well as for Asian and Indian candidates, was far lower than the response to the letters written by men with white-sounding names. Consider asking each candidate to submit a diversity statement that describes their experience working with diverse populations. Here's a hint. Don't ask the person of color or the people of color in the room to ask the diversity question in the interview. It makes it look like only one or two people are really interested in the topic, and it also makes the person feel like that's kind of their only role in the room and on the search committee. Lastly, never ask impermissible questions, questions about race, ethnicity, marital status, disability, religion, or any other protected factor. These questions are outlined in our search procedures. Faculty searches are a lot like a game of Yahtzee. You know, you put the dice in, you shake the canister up, and you throw the dice out. You're never quite sure how the number's going to line up. And you're never quite sure in the search process all the things that are going to happen along the way. But if you've followed best practices, you've had those difficult conversations about implicit bias and how to guard against it, then you will have reduced barriers to diversity in the faculty search process, and you will have the confidence that you've conducted the best search possible.